Hello and welcome to What a Guy Wants podcast. This is my co host and friend, Coach Ali, and my name is Coach Yogesh. And this podcast is for all things men. Without further ado, let's jump into today's topic, which is a very interesting one called men and grief. So, Ali, before we start about going into grief, what made you choose today's topic?
So, Yogesh, this was a really uncomfortable one, actually. We were discussing topics a week ago, and when I brought this topic up, it was difficult because it's only been about 2 weeks and a bit where I lost my grandmother, and this is the first time in my life I've lost somebody who I am super close to and super attached to, and accepting that loss was one of the most like painful things that I've had to experience to date, and at the same time, my grandmother was suffering for a good decade. So, her health was deteriorating over a decade. So, whilst there was a part of me that felt liberated and happy for her that her sufferings come to an end, nothing can actually prepare you for the loss that and the emotions that you actually go through and you feel when somebody who's near and dear is gone. So yeah, as uncomfortable as this is, I feel that it's a very important topic to bring to light and discuss.
Yeah, and huge props to you for having the courage to actually bring up something while you were facing the grief. So it's easy sometimes to talk about these things after it's done, but while we are right in the center of that situation, it becomes even more challenging.
Yes, it does. It does, especially because, life has a way of happening. So the first 1 or 2 days, you're going through an intense emotions. And then
Yeah.
a few days after that, you are actually having a conversation with your friends. You're talking to your friends, you're laughing, you're talking, and then you go back into the sadness. And then, when you're laughing and talking, it's almost like, what am I doing? It's almost like a self-judgment. What am I doing?
Yeah.
Is this even right? Is this the right thing to do? And so I'd already promised my kids. So this weekend that went by, both my kids there, it was their birthdays. They're
Yeah.
only 6 days or 6 days apart. And I promised them taking them to a water park.
Yeah.
And because they'd never seen my grandmother in a full element. So for them, they didn't quite understand, that loss. And whilst I was there and taking my kids to the water park and I was doing the activities, it was like, it felt really hollow. It felt like I don't want to be here, but I'm still here. And at the same time, life has a way of happening and it carries on. So I don't even know whether I've answered your question, or I've gone into a completely different tangent.
No, I see what you've been basically hinting at. There is a lot of guilt and feeling bad that comes up when right after a grief period we want to have normal activity, right? And the
Well,
thing is life goes on, and the second thing is that grief comes in very different stages. I've known
yes.
people who have only started to grieve something 6 months down the line. So, this is such a tricky subject, especially for men, because I think I've shared this story with you before. Every time there has been something that's happened in our family, unfortunately, I've only seen grandparents who have lived 80 years and more pass away. So they've lived good lives. And as you said, they were a bit struggling with health and things happening. So they weren't themselves anymore. But when that happened, right, I saw how my dad responded versus how my mom responded. So a lot of the masculine energy was about doing the stuff, making the calls, arrangements for the cremation, for, say, a sermon that could happen, getting all the things there. We also actually have a big community. So a lot of people are invited at our house to just sit with us. And there's food for everyone that has to be prepared and all of it. So dad takes the lead with a lot of those things, whereas mom does the food bit, but also does a lot of emotional connect with other women, sometimes grieving, sometimes crying, sometimes just having a conversation, remembering a memory. But the dad deals with it through working through the masculine energy. I like to now see, because you've been in the situation currently, how did you respond to it? Was it the masculine energy that was coming up, or the feminine energy where you spoke to people about it?
So it's a mix of both, I would say, is that initially as it happened, right? The first thing was the term actually, it's called action oriented grief.
Okay.
And I went into that mode where, okay, right now I need to, the family needs to be informed, my siblings need to be informed, and
Yeah.
what needs to be done. So it was a very much like a
Yes.
doer, yet it was also about grieving. And it was just really interesting. Like different ways men grieve is that there are times where we're okay to grieve with family. Then
Yeah.
there are times when we want to grieve alone and where we don't want anybody around us. And then there are times where we're actually just managing and sorting preparations, what needs to be done, and or trying to ask family and friends for help. Okay, can you manage this? And in a very similar way, we've got this community that comes together, that takes care of things. And at the same time, there's also a lot of gratitude because you see family come together, the family unite together, the
Yeah.
family being there for each other, friends being there for each other. And I'm just thinking that we had a house full. What would it have been like if the house wasn't full? It didn't
Yeah.
have many people. And of course, there were times as well which brought anger as well. So
Yes.
I would say is that especially when there would be people who would come, and of course their intentions are the best of intentions, right? That time when they're asking you to, they use the word strong, be strong,
Yeah.
and I've made the same mistake as well. I've made the same mistake. And I think that's one of the worst things to tell somebody who's grieving,
Yeah.
because at that time, right, they need to feel what they're feeling. It's a tremendous loss at that time.
Yeah.
So, and there are other family members of mine because who are almost like carers. So what they do is they become strong, but then
Yeah.
what happens is that they live with, if it's unreleased, the grief, right? They live with entire period of unreleased grief that's not even realized. So I
Yeah.
feel that that is something that we should just, in that period, we go through our own emotions, our own cycles. And there's sometimes in life where we don't need to be strong. And this is
Yeah.
one time in life where we don't need to be strong, because grief in itself is also a powerful emotion. You're actually honoring the person who's
Yeah.
actually gone. You're honoring the loss of that person who's actually gone.
Yeah.
So that came up for me quite strongly. Yeah.
That's beautiful. So, two, three things come up for me is firstly, be strong actually has a hidden message. I'm not comfortable with you crying. I'm not comfortable with emotions. So, I'm also encouraging you not to have that. So, it's as much of a lack of permission to emote and be yourself. So, that's the first thing. The second thing is, you just said it, you hit the nail on the head. Grieving is actually so important. It actually is an acknowledgement. So, a lot of times, you see a lot of men who don't have a breakup. They don't want to grieve. They want to drink. They want to rebound. They want to work 24/7 at the office. So, what are they doing is the action oriented grief, right? Which you just said. But if you don't have the other emotional bit, the rebalancing inside, there is actually a lack of acknowledgement that it has happened. So I'm still expecting this person, if it's a breakup, to come back, or this person who's no more to be there. And every day is another disappointment, another reason to be action oriented towards an alcohol thing, or to a new woman, or to binging, or to working even more hard, burning out. So the grieving bit is acknowledgement of what happened. It also says that this person was very important to me. This person really meant a lot to me, and I'm going to honor that person for that moment. But it's also rebalancing inside, because the thing is, we think everything is very obvious, right? Because as adults, right, we think, yeah, someone passed away. Logically, I know they passed away and my life isn't the same anymore. But our bodies and how our minds, how our emotions work have to be processed as well. We don't understand that needs a little bit more effort, that needs more honoring, or giving space to. So that bit is so profound, which you just said. I think it's 100% right.
Thank you, Yogesh. And, just adding to that, right? I was just looking around grief, and it makes so much sense, right? Whether it's grief where you've lost someone, or grief where there's a breakup, or grief where there's a divorce, anything like that, we go through a similar pattern.
Yeah.
And generally, we go through 5 stages. And the first
Yeah.
stage is like denial, where
Deny.
we're not ready to accept what's actually happened. And
Yeah.
then it's more about anger. Anger is more about, if she had taken better care of her health, it wouldn't have been that way. So it's anger. It moves on to then bargaining. Bargaining is only if I had spotted it. So, for example, in my case, it's more like I knew that, like, for the longest time as a child, my grandmother suffered from high blood pressure. And it
Yeah.
was me who used to take the stethoscope and the blood pressure machine, the manual one, and I would check her
Yeah.
blood pressure. And for the longest time, I've been in that phase where I'm like, how is it that I could not have spotted the signs? How is it that I could not have seen that this was happening? And then we go into our own period of depression, and then comes
Yeah.
acceptance. And for
Yeah.
me, it's interesting the way it happened is because my grandmother was suffering for over a decade. A lot of these emotions I already went through before her passing. And it
Yeah.
was like the acceptance came immediately. But I do
Yeah.
remember that even before her passing, those 10 years, it was more about how is it that I couldn't spot those signs? Like, I used to check her blood pressure. I used
Yeah.
to be there. So it's, again, we all go through our phases and we all go through our stages, and it's very unique for every person. It's very unique. And at the same time, it's a blessing to have people around you, to have family around you, to have that support of friends and family. And if someone doesn't have that support of family and friends, seek out for help. It's seek out for therapy, the seek out for coaching, because at that moment in time, it's honoring yourself as well, where you're taking care of yourself. Grieving is a process of self-care. And if we need therapy at that point, so be it. It's only healing, right? It's a way of healing ourselves through it.
Yeah. And every situation, everything that happens hits different people differently. So
Absolutely.
I would say also let us all let go of judgment of why is it so hard on you? Why can't you be strong? Why are you not dealing with it? This person dealt with it. All of that is judgment, comparison. And we don't know how one stage hits one person, and it's not linear as well. So the stages you said, they're not linear. I could have, yep, denial generally comes in the first thing. Basically, it's a lack of acceptance, is what denial is. But generally, there could be depression, feeling low first, anger comes in later, and denial comes in again. So all of these stages are not linear, and just asking someone to linearly, mechanically be okay with it is unfair. Asking them,
Absolutely.
pushing them to take help is good. That's a healthy thing. But just that judgment, as you said, right? It really made you angry when someone said, be strong, or don't cry, and all of those things.
Beautiful, Yogesh. And you know what, you just hit the nail on the head for me. It's more about, and I've been guilty of it as well, is that when I'm saying be strong to someone who's been through it, it's more like, okay, I'm in this place where I've come for you, but I don't have the bandwidth to process your emotions or help you through your emotions. And I realized later that right now, when I think about it, having been through this experience, it's more about that when I'm telling somebody to be strong, instead of doing that or having this need to fill the silence up with conversation,
Yeah.
sometimes the most powerful thing is to just sit with someone and just be silent. And silence speaks so many words without actually even mentioning a word, where you don't say strong and you're just sitting there with that person. You don't need to process their emotions. You don't need to do anything. You just need to sit there. And that
Yeah.
in itself is such a powerful way of being with some. And I find that is something that's been like a huge takeaway. And at the same time, I've also come to believe is that, when somebody is letting go of their emotions, right? And if somebody is actually grieving and is actually crying and the tears are rolling, maybe at that time, it's a human tendency to console. Maybe we should refrain from consoling, be there with that person,
Yeah.
because that person is releasing the emotions. So let that person maybe release the emotions, let those emotions come out, because that's so
Yeah.
important that those emotions have to come out and need to come out. And when we console the other person, it's more like we put a break towards that emotional release.
Yeah, yeah. I guess all of it then comes into how do people perceive crying and grieving. I feel a lot of people perceive crying as a negative thing. So you see a kid, right? If he's crying, I've seen people actually like leave everything as if there's a shooting happening or some crazy thing happening and run, be like, no, don't cry, as if there's something like absolutely bad and crazy things going to happen. So it's actually how we perceive crying. What's your take on it?
I love that, right? Especially with boys, right? When crying as a child and hearing the words "boys don't cry," right? Again, it brings in a lot of like meaning for a child. At the same time, like, yes, I think that it's such a natural tendency as a parent when my child is crying. It's about trying to understand why they're crying. And
Yeah,
the natural tendency is to make them stop.
yeah,
And it's about maybe sitting there at that moment in time and thinking about whether at this moment, like, what does my child need the most?
yeah.
What does my child need the most? It's because when I'm telling my child to say, I want you to stop crying, I'm making it about me because it's inconvenient to me. And
Right.
I'm making the whole thing about me instead of making it
Yeah,
about my child. What
yeah.
if I let myself go at that time and made it about my child? What does my child need in this moment in time? So,
Wow.
yeah.
So, Ali, for all the dads and mums who are listening right now, what would be the best way to move forward? So, say my child is crying. So, just for full clarity, I don't have a child, but I do have nieces and nephews. So, say my niece is crying. Would me just embracing her at that moment, would that put a stop to that as well? Or should it just be me giving her the presents and just sitting there at that moment?
So I guess that I would see grieving for someone you've lost versus a child crying are two very different situations.
Absolutely.
And at the same time, if somebody asked me that question, and I'm just thinking about my own kids, right? The first thing I would tell myself is that be patient and take care of your emotions. Because sometimes it's more about, and I've done that as well, is that when my child is crying, that crying is met with my anger or it's
Yes.
met with a negative emotion coming from my side, which is
Yeah.
actually not actually helping the situation. It's actually adding to my child's upset. So it's about first just taking that pause and finding that level of presence. And this is advice I'm giving to myself right now. Finding the level of presence and saying that, okay, you're okay. Make this about your child.
Yeah.
And then going to my child and say and figuring out and asking what's happened, like what does that child need in that moment. If I'm the one who said something and that's made my child feel hurt, maybe at that time the child might not want to hug me. The last person on
True.
earth he wants to hug is me. so
Right.
so yeah, I think it's very situational dependent, but
Yeah.
we forget to ask our kids what they need in that moment. Maybe it's about asking them, what do you need right now? How can I
Wow.
help you right now? And every answer would be very different.
Beautiful. So, if I may summarize it, it's a two-step process. Step one, manage your own emotions as the parent and just be there, present, without having negative emotions. So, managing the emotions means watch for the negative emotion and let it go. Second thing is then going with the energy of what would you need? How may I serve you?
Absolutely. That's the advice I'm giving myself in this moment. Yeah.
That's beautiful. So, Ali, this has been really, really profound. What is something you'd like to, like an advice you'd like to give to the viewers now about grieving in general?
So I would say that number one is that grieving is like, it's almost like you're honoring the person who's gone. So if what's coming up for you is real, and again, in that moment in time, I would say that there are times in life where strength is required. And during that moment in time, you don't need to be so strong. Maybe you can let go and just be. So any emotion that's coming up for you, just be with that emotion.
Yeah.
Rather than wanting to be something else. So yeah, that's what's coming up for me right now, Yogesh. Thank you.
Wow. Yeah. I would say I would take it up a notch and be like, especially for men, strength would be being strong, would be actually being vulnerable and open to grieving. And it doesn't need to be cry in front of everyone and like all of that. It just means being open to grieving and being in touch with our emotions. Because from my experience, grief is the only way we can heal. And that's the only way we can get over it and actually move forward in a healthy way. So, to move forward in a healthy way, we have to be strong. And for some men, it means actually being open to being vulnerable and grieving.
Absolutely. Absolutely. At times it's so situational dependent, right? At times we want to grieve with our family. Sometimes we want to grieve alone.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, it's so important to give ourselves the permission to do what we need to do at that moment in time.
Absolutely. The how is very unique, but the aspect of grieving is very important. And on that note, a little bit of a heavy subject, but still very profound. Thank you, everyone who has tuned in. We would love to hear from you. I am Coach Yogesh, and that's my co host, Ali. And we are What a Guy Wants podcast. And today's topic, men and grief. We'd love to hear from you what you thought about it. Do you agree with what we said? Or if you don't agree, we'd still like to hear from you. We're cool that way. Thank you so much and see
Thank
you next
you.
week.
Thank you for tuning in to this podcast on Spotify. I'm not here for the obligatory like, share, and subscribe. The whole purpose behind What a Guy Wants is to make you a better man. If you think this is making you a better version of yourself, please like, share, comment, and see you next week.